Hey guys, about a month ago I did a video on mile per gallon and how it's affected by the various gears and speed. We did some testing empty truck at 4th, 5th, and 6th gear, and at 50, 55, 60, and 65 mile per hour. Well, today we're going to do it with a loaded truck, pulling my camper. Got about a total of probably 6,000 pounds, including the camper and what I got in the back of the truck. So it's relatively a small camper. But we got some readings here, and we're going to go ahead and plot that out. So let's go ahead and take a look at it. Okay, guys, before we go to the chart, I want to show you one of Cummins' rock solid rules. I love the way they just really etch it in stone. If I said that, or if anybody said that, they'd say, "Oh, you're full of crap." But when Cummins says it, it's kind of like E.F. Hutton. Everybody listens. Although that may not be a good example because E.F. Hutton went bankrupt. but anyway, one of their rock solid rules: above 55 mile per hour, each 1 mile per hour increase in vehicle speed decreases mileage by 0.1 mile per gallon. So, and that's rock solid rule. In my case, on my camper, I think it's a little worse than that because I'm pulling a big parachute down the road. I've got a very square front camper, and I don't have nearly the aerodynamic advantages of some of these big 18-wheelers have. I've often thought about putting one of those wind deflectors on my roof, but I've heard some stories say they work great, and some people say they're not worth a darn, so I don't know. But anyway, just wanted to show you this before we got into the charts, and I want to show you one other slide here that's very interesting, also from Cummins. And when I say something's going to be interesting, it's probably going to be boring as hell to most people. But this was something that I found, and after this video, I'm going back to getting my hands dirty again and get away from this theoretical stuff. But anyway, this is kind of cool, I think. This is from Cummins. Engine and driveline break-in. It takes 10,000 miles to break in your vehicle. And this is probably more geared for the big boys. But, it does cover motorhomes and everything else. In fact, our manual, I think, says 6,000 miles to break in the engine and run the hell out of it. But you do get a 2 to 5% increase in mile per gallon, which is pretty good and pretty interesting. And I think I saw that, by the way. This is one that's really cool. Mile per gallon improves approximately 6% from 100% tread depth. In other words, a new tire, after it's worn down 50%, you get somewhere between 0 and 6% better gas mileage. So on my truck, I ought to be getting 6% because those damn Transforce original tires are flat worn out. When I had my water pump changed the other day, I heard the mechanic and the road test guy were talking about how pathetic my tires looked. But I've got some Michelins that I'm going to put on as soon as they come in. Running one gear down, which is what we're going to talk about in the slides. One gear down, you decrease mile per gallon by approximately 3% due to gear mesh effect. The engine cruising RPM is approximately 400 plus RPM higher, which decreases mile per gallon by approximately 4%. That, I think, I haven't calculated that, so I may be talking out of turn, but that is, and that's a 6 to 8%. That is probably about the RPM change when we change gears. That is probably about right, and I think this probably holds true for our trucks. But the one takeaway from this is the running a gear down does increase your mile per gallon, and that's also one of their rock solid rules. And you can't argue with a rock solid rule. You just can't argue with it. It's rock solid. I mean, and it came from Cummins. Engine speed, proper gearing effect. An engine geared to run 1450 RPMs at 65 miles an hour gets approximately 4% better mile per gallon than one geared to run 1600 mile per gallon RPMs and 65 mile per hour. So, and then if the truck is geared too high, it will force the driver to run one gear down. And in some cases, we're in that bucket with that 342 rear axle and a very heavy load. We can't run at the gear that we'd like to sometimes for optimum mile per gallon. Yeah, with my little camper, I can almost do this. In fact, I can do it most of the time if it's flat country, 65 miles an hour at, I figure I'm running about 1410. I'm not quite at 1450 with the 342, and at 65 miles an hour, that's what I've calculated. And I've also measured that, I think, on my CTS monitor. Anyway, I wanted to show you that. It's cool. I thought it's cool. And hey, it's rock solid, so you know you can't fight it. Okay, so now let's get into the nitty-gritty of the numbers that I recorded on my loaded camping trip here this weekend. These are all taken on the Swampland Expressway between Lafayette, Louisiana and Baton Rouge. Probably the most dangerous highway in the USA. There's no place to pull over if you have a problem. It's just a barrier, and then there's swamp down below, and man, there's been many a 18-wheeler and cars went over that barrier. Anyway, I always worry about it when I'm pulling my camper across there because there's really no stopping. You'd have to probably get the cops out there. At least that's what I'd try to do, and they'd probably shut down the road while you change a flat tire or got a wreck or whatever. And that road is always shut down. Anyway, here's one of, I think, 2 charts I just wanted to go through. Load, you know, we talked about it last time. As you gear down, you drop your load, or you could look at it as increasing your available load. And that's just because we're moving up higher RPMs, and we're moving up higher on the torque curve. So there's more available torque than there is here, say at 37%. This is percentage. And so that's the way I interpret that. And that's a calculated number by Chrysler, and it's available through the OBDC2 connector that reports out on my CTS monitor. But as you can see, we did the same thing we did last time, and I got the link there for the first test, empty. And a lot of it's similar. We did 50, 55, 60, and 65. The 50 and 55 I almost left out because it's so slow that, you know, we rarely tow at those speeds, and I really couldn't get any kind of information in 6 gear. It's just too low. It's lugging at that point. I couldn't even get it in. I couldn't even get it to go in actually. But at 50, I was able to get a few readings, and boy, I'll tell you one thing: if you want to get some good fuel mileage, slow down. It's amazing. Now, this is by no means a number that you're going to be able to produce every time. These are spot readings that were kind of an average over a 5-mile distance that I did. What I did is I reset my EVIC panel on each one of these speed tests, and I took the average of them. And so this is the way I came up with this. You know, real life calculations are going to be less than that, you know. But it just goes to show you, though, it's all relative because it was all done the same way. I just wouldn't think that I would get these good of numbers. But don't forget Cummins' rock solid rule about wind resistance, and above 55 mile per hour, the drop in fuel economy. Don't forget that. It's a rock solid rule. But you know, you can see by the dotted line, which is a trend line I just put in there, and you know, it's the trend is the same as it was with the empty test. The higher RPMs and the lower the gear, the less mile per gallon, and that's really the end of the story. I could just shut this video down right now and call it a day, night, because you know, that's the story. I've often wondered myself, which was the reason I wanted to do this in the first place, was to satisfy my own intuition about whether, especially over here in this range where I tow at, because I have towed in fifth gear and I've towed in sixth gear, but I've never really took the time to stay in one or the other long enough to really calculate the difference, if there's any difference. At least I was questioning whether there was a difference. I think based on Cummins' rock solid rule, which we can't argue, there is a difference. And I proved that to myself, but it's very hard to, because every time you tow, and you guys know this, the conditions are different. You've got different wind. You may have a tailwind, you may have a headwind, you may have a crosswind, and man, wind affects mile per gallon. And that's in the rock solid rules also. But you know, wind, especially on a camper, because it's, boy, when I get a headwind and I'm pulling that, you know, 8 by 11 foot sheet of wall down the road, it just, mile per gallon drops exponentially. But anyway, there's the chart, and you can see it just drops off. And sometimes you got to pull in these low gears. This is almost perfect if you can get in 65, or you know, if you like to go faster, that's fine. But if you can get in sixth gear and stay in sixth gear, primarily above 65. And the next chart I'm going to show you why I say that. 60 is too low to try to run in sixth gear, but 65 and above, if you can get in it, it's perfect. So by now you guys are saying, what in the hell is this guy doing to us? What is all this crap? But it's really not that much to it when you look at it. Here's our gears, and right on top of it I've got the mile per hour. And we're just looking at two different things. We're looking at exhaust temperature, and we're looking at RPMs. I went ahead and put RPMs in it this time because I thought it was a little bit interesting. So nothing really dramatic over here. You know, 50 miles an hour, exhaust temperatures are relatively stable. 1420 RPMs. That's for that speed, you're just, you know, sure don't need any more than that. There's no way you're going to get into. I calculated the RPM on this one in sixth gear just to show how low it would be. You can do this when you're running empty, but you can't do it. That's 1085 RPMs. You're not going to do that pulling any kind of weight at all. Same over here at 55 mile per hour. You're doing about 1200 RPMs, 1195. It's just too low. That's lugging. And you know, it may not meet the perfect definition of lugging, but it's lugging to me. And I think everybody can tell when they're lugging an engine, pretty much, when you just press on that throttle and it just don't want to go, you know, or it goes real slow. In an automatic, it's going to jump down gears, so it's probably maybe a little harder to tell, but anyway. So let's look at this 55 a little bit. You can see the exhaust gas temperature. It doesn't care whether it's in fifth or fourth, because you're up here in the RPM range, torque range, where, you know, it's just pretty stable. Now this one, and I've got a video on this, I'll show you the link here. This is where I talk about, I hate to keep mentioning the word lugging because some people say you can't lug an automatic transmission. Nah, it's probably technically true. It'll drop a gear before you do any, getting to the point where you're really harming the engine. I agree with that. But you can cause it some I don't know, some grief, or yourself some grief by running in such a at such a low speed and a high gear that it's just chugging along, wanting to downshift, and that's where we at right here. We're so down low at 1300 RPMs, and if you look back at that video link, you'll see that I did this once, and then I dropped it down into 5th gear and showed that drop. And look at the drop that you get, and this is the key to me, that if you're going to run in 6th gear, do it up here in this range, above 1400 RPMs. That's my personal opinion, because anything lower than that in 6th gear, I think you're going to be seeing some pretty high exhaust gas temperatures. Look what happens when you drop into 5th gear. And I've documented this several times. You go up to 1700 RPMs, which is really, this truck loves to run between 1700 and 2000 RPMs, particularly right in this neighborhood here. It'll just eat up just about anything it encounters in terms of hills and that sort of thing. Now you get into the mountains, that's a different story. But it likes, and that's where, right in this area is where it's developing its maximum torque. And you can see between 4th and 5th, exhaust gas temp, stable. But boy, it spikes up when you drop it into that last overdrive. This is an overdrive. This is an overdrive on the 68 REF. This is 1-to-1. And theoretically 1-to-1 has your less, that's your most efficient gear, because it's you're not going through any planetary gears or anything to drive the drivetrain. You're turning everything from the engine straight back to the differential. So theoretically, probably if you wanted to drive, if I was in a contest to see how we can get the best mile per gallon at any speed, I would probably go over here and get in 4th gear, 1-to-1, and I'd probably do it at somewhere in the 1400 range, like 50 miles an hour, but I'd drop down to whatever speed this would be, and that would be some really good mile per gallon. But that's, enough with that theoretical talk. So 65, this is getting right into the perfect mile per gallon, or the best mile per gallon that you're going to get if you're going to do 65 miles an hour. Another factor, guys, is if you've got a tradesman with 17-inch tires, you're going to be about 3 inches lower, 2.5 inches, something like that. That's going to put you right at about 1500 RPMs. So you would have a slight advantage as far as gear ratio. You'll have the equivalent of a taller or less, not as tall rear end as you would with the 20-inch tires. But it's a slight difference, and it doesn't make much difference. But that's about it, guys. I hope you get something out of all of this mess. It was fun doing it. I enjoyed it. Taught me a couple of things about my truck that I didn't know. And the moral of the story is, run in the highest gear that you can comfortably run and have decent drivability, acceleration, and that sort of thing. And you'll get better fuel mileage. So until next time, adios.